Twitter was ablaze last night as the college football playoff committee released its first rankings of the season. Georgia won. We knew that. Apparently, Alabama's loss to A&M meant nothing. Oregon's,
no, actually nothing.
Yeah, I mean, they'd be ranked second had they won or lost there, I would think. Oregon's head-to-head win at Ohio State meant everything. They get ahead of Ohio State. And if you're a group of 5 unbeaten, you were either ranked lower than you thought you'd be or you're not ranked at all. Like a UTSA team that's perfect and not even ranked.
I know.
There's Cincinnati down there at number 6. Despite that win against Notre Dame, it comes in at 10th in the poll. Oklahoma fans not happy either. They're the only 9-0 team in the country, and they're ranked number 8 right now. But still a ton out there. I mean, if Oklahoma's a team that controls its own fate, they win out, they're going to be in. Cincinnati? Don't know. Josh Pate, host of the Late Kick podcast. Josh, what was your biggest takeaway? I know you have a lot of them, but your largest takeaway from our very first playoff poll of the season?
Well, my takeaway was not so much from the poll, Hassel. It was from, do you notice, like I do notice that everyone has varying degrees of conspiracy theory about these folks, about this committee, even though it changes. The makeup of the committee changes every single whatever number of cycles. And when they get those folks on the record live, they can barely complete coherent, responsive sentences about how they're figuring these things out. And yet I'm supposed to believe there's a master plan behind all this. So I kind of dismiss some of that. So that was my first takeaway. My second takeaway was, wow, look at OU, all the way down there. Where are they, number 8 or something like that? That mildly surprised me, even though going into it, there were some people out there who said, resume combined with game control. Some years that matters, some years it doesn't. I did not believe it. Like, some people told me, hey, they're going to be a little bit lower than you think. I did not believe that. Wake is exactly where I thought they'd be. Notre Dame, about where I thought they'd be. I did not know how they were going to handle that. And I also was very interested in this whole Oregon and Ohio State and will they actually value the head-to-head thing. But even with that, you've got that and then the follow-up talking point of but, and then there's the ellipsis, and then there's but it's not going to matter at the end of the day because if Ohio State's still a 1 loss, they'll hop Oregon. A lot of assumptions. That was my takeaway. A lot of assumptions that I'm not ready to make yet.
So do you buy into any of the conspiracy theorists? Because there are a lot of them out there who believe what they are selling.
Well, I believe in the conspiracy of putting the best teams in the playoff. Now, you can define best differently than I define best, and that has historically what has happened in this whole scenario. But it is not, to me at least, a conspiracy if your strength of schedule is down in the basement and mine's all the way on the ground floor, maybe even up in the attic, for me to be ranked ahead of you, even if I may have more losses than you. To me, that's not conspiratorial. To some people, it is. So if we're calling that a conspiracy, yeah, there's a conspiracy against teams that play weak schedules. Now, we all know the counter to that is, well, they've done all they can do. They've played everyone. They've beaten everyone they can beat. That's true. No one's saying it's Cincinnati's fault that they're not in the top 4. I'm just telling you, or I guess the committee's telling you, it's not Michigan State's fault either. It's not Oregon's fault either. And so I don't view that as a conspiracy. Some people do. So I've always kind of delineated myself there. I've agreed, for the record, with that committee at the conclusion that they've arrived at, I think, in every one of these playoff fields since its inception. I have not always agreed with the logic, but we can have differing logic and still arrive at the same conclusion. So no, Chris, I guess I don't buy into a whole lot of the conspiracy.
I've seen some tweets out there in response to, I think, people who are upset with Alabama being number 2. The response is, well, look at what the gambling lines would be right now. You'd have Georgia as a 3-score favorite against the number 4 team. You'd have Alabama as a 3-score favorite against the number 3 team, that being Michigan State. Do you think that gambling is starting to impact how the committee members rank these teams?
Yeah, I do. I don't think it should. This is, to me, the danger of the proliferation of gambling into the mainstream of sports. I love it. We talk about it on Late Kick all the time, so I'm not against that. And I'm not even one of these that says we can't let gambling become legal because then point shaving will happen and game fixing will happen. That's not the danger to me. I mean, that's kind of boogeyman in the closet sort of stuff. Where my fear lies is if we've got someone who just learned what a parlay or a teaser is last week and they all of a sudden are starting to speak the gambling language, but it's very, very loose. It's very new to them. and they get shown a hypothetical point spread for the first time, and they get introduced to the power rating philosophy for the first time, that has no business, nor do those folks interpreting that has any business in this process. Because you have to value on-field competition. You have to value on-field result, and it has to be, at some point, a balance of power and merit. But you can't look at this at the end of the day and have no more data points that you could have arrived at to where we've really got those folks in a room saying, well, you know, we would have ranked this team above that team, but Vegas says they'd be favored by 7.5. Here's why you can't do it, Chris. Because unless favorites go undefeated in the regular season, then that means a point spread is just that. It's for betting purposes. It's not an indicator on how the game's actually going to play out. I'll give you a perfect example. I guarantee you, as much as Oregon's ahead of Ohio State right now, if both of those teams were to win out and the strength of schedule tilts towards the Buckeyes, which it inevitably would, you will have someone, whether they go on record or not, you will have someone in that committee room who looks at one conference champ with one loss, they look at another conference champ with one loss, and they will say, true enough, A beat B, but B would be favored against A, and therefore I value B, and I'm going to put him in. Well, hey, here's the problem with that logic. B was favored against A the first time they played, and they didn't beat him that time. So I don't really have any interest in listening to that as much as I'm an advocate for using some common sense approaches to figuring out strength of schedule in a more power rating, Vegas-based manner. I have no interest in a committee member or the AD from Rutgers or associate AD from Baylor telling me who they'd have favored over who and therefore who they think should go to the playoff. You got to have more data points you arrive at to decide it on the field than me looking on a chalkboard and seeing who'd be favored over who.
Yeah, results have to matter. I mean, if you're just going by a point spread, then theoretically, you know, if Bryce Young gets hurt, Alabama loses a few games without him, he comes back, they've got 4 losses, but hey, they'd be favored against everybody else, so we got to get him in the playoff. It's just, it can't be how it works. Josh, you had an interesting tweet this morning, somewhat of a cryptic tweet. The college football big lies. A win is a win. You are what your record says you are. What are you getting at with that tweet?
I am nothing if not cryptic. I mean, that's how I live my life. That is my middle name. All I mean by that, notice it's registered, so don't you think about stealing it, Hassel, because that's registered now. First off, in pro sports, both of those are true. That's why I call them college football big lies. In pro sports, I think it was Jimmy Johnson who famously once said, oh, you are what your record says you are. Maybe it was Parcells. Either way, it's a pro axiom, and it's true in pro sports. And the reason is because the gap between the best and the worst on Sundays, some years, is under 17 points. In college football, the gap between Alabama and the middle of the SEC is larger than 17 points, much less some of these G5 programs. We just had, as much as we're talking about hypothetical spreads, we just found out as soon as this playoff field was listed how big a favorite Alabama or Georgia would be over the teams that are listed in the 3 and 4 spots. So what I'm talking about when I say you aren't always what your record says you are is, number one, trying to incentivize folks scheduling tough out-of-conference games. Hassel, you know good and well, Ohio State could have scheduled Akron. They scheduled Oregon. Now, they got beat, but they scheduled them. What I look at when you look at some of these undefeateds and people clamor for, well, they're undefeated. You can't be an undefeated and get left out. What I ask is, how many other teams do I think would be undefeated against your schedule? And when I look at Wake, I got about a dozen who I think could be undefeated against them. Cincinnati, as much as I like them, I got about a dozen, 10 to a dozen that I think would be favored. Now, that doesn't mean they would have won all the games, but I'm about strength of schedule. So you are not always what your record says you are. And a win is a win also doesn't matter. Listen, if a win was a win, Oklahoma would be ranked number 1 right now, or number 2 at worst. They took into account on that committee how close that game was against Kansas, how close that game was against Tulane. In the NFL, no one cares how close Seattle and Jacksonville is. If you win by 3, you win. A win is a win. And you're 1-0 and you are what your record says you are. There are a lot of people, God bless them, who grew up covering pro sports who now cover college sports. And I'm fine with that. What I'm not fine with is taking the Sunday ideology and trying to shoehorn it in to Saturday because it doesn't fit. These are same sports. The ball looks the same, it's shaped the same, but it's 2 completely different formats.
And there's 32 teams in the NFL, 130 teams in FBS college football. Cincinnati, Josh, number 6 in the country. They're 2 in the AP, but 6 in the playoff rankings. What does that tell you about the Bearcats' chances of being the first group of 5 team to make the playoff?
the same thing we knew, and that is they're going to need help. I had a lot of people come at me yesterday. Imagine that, Hassel. People came at me, digitally, of course. And they said, I guess you look stupid now. And I'm not saying I don't several times a day, but not on this particular thing. I've been misquoted, and what I told you when we spoke last week and what I have said many times on the show is I think Cincinnati will be in the playoff if they're undefeated. For the record, I still have that belief. But what I never meant, and what I'm not telling you now, is they control their own destiny. They never did. It's quite the opposite. They need help just the same as previous G5 teams would have needed help. The only difference is we don't have a bunch of 2019 LSUs and 2020 Alabamas in the room this year. All these teams have vulnerability. Believe it or not, I'm going to whisper this, even Georgia has some vulnerability. So what I see is I look in my rearview mirror and I see complete chaos in September. And then I look over here and I see complete chaos in October. How am I supposed to believe we're going to have a sea of tranquility in November? And so I'm looking at Cincy, and if they remain undefeated, everyone has just assumed Big Ten champ will be this, SEC champ will be this. I'm not assuming any of that. Like, I'm not assuming Oregon's not going to lose another game. And so I think there are one, if not multiple dominoes ahead of Oregon or ahead of Cincinnati and behind them too, still to fall to where I still think they got a half decent path if they go undefeated, even having started out ranked where they are, which some people thought was a death sentence yesterday, and I just didn't interpret as such.
And there's teams out there with multiple losses that could find themselves in the playoff discussion when all is said and done. You're going to watch a couple of them play this week, Auburn and A&M from College Station. How did these two teams totally turn their seasons around? Because at one point for both of these teams, we had kind of, or I'm not going to say you, but we as college football fans and media had kind of written them off.
Yeah, you can include me, especially with A&M. You can include me. I mean, I'd sold them right on down the river. That's why the upset they pulled over Alabama, to me, is the biggest stunner of the year. That and LSU over Florida for different reasons. But that A&M over Alabama, that was the biggest stunner of the year to me. I feel like I woke up 5 minutes ago. I can't clear my throat. So I wish this cup had water in it. But think about this, Hassel, like Zach Calzada, his first few times out, when he was replacing Haynes King, quarterback there at A&M, everyone was watching him stumble around against Colorado and couldn't get out of his own way against Arkansas. And people viewed that as an indictment on Jimbo Fisher. Well, now the same crowd is silent because they're playing winning football. And it just sometimes, as it turns out, your second string quarterback's not ready to go as soon as you put him on the field. But he's ready now, and they're playing really good complementary football. With Auburn, this is the more fascinating story to me. So I watched them lose at Penn State. They come home, they almost lose to Georgia State. And it has to be noted, during that time, they had a wide receivers coach fired. They just scrapped him in the middle of the season. They benched Bo Nix, the guy shining for them now. They benched him during that Georgia State game. And so the talk all week was about how much turmoil internally the Auburn program was in. And Brian Harsin, he's brand new on the job. How's he going to rectify this? Is he losing his locker room? Some people were foolish enough to suggest that. And then they went and played their best football, and they beat LSU on the road. And a couple of weeks later, they went and beat Arkansas on the road. And now, I don't think nationally it's recognized yet, one of these teams, the Auburn Tigers, totally controls their own destiny, and A&M's very close to controlling their own destiny. Both of those programs in the SEC on Saturday, game of the week, the one we're going to be at, both of those teams could still not only play in Atlanta. Chris, if they win the rest of their games and the dominoes fall the way they need to, they may control their own destiny as it relates to the playoff. Because I know Auburn's got 2 losses right now, and we've never had a 2-loss team in the playoff. But I want you to think about what we're looking at. A number 13 next to the name. So they already respect them, even with 2 losses. If they were to win out, let's just play with this for a second. They would have beaten number 14 on the road, A&M, this Saturday. They will have beaten number 2, Alabama. And then they will have gone and avenged themselves against number 1, Georgia. There's no way, even with 2 losses, you're beating 14, 2-1 down the stretch. That's the most recent image the committee has in their mind of you, and they're leaving you out. I think that kind of resume would jump even some of these 1-loss conference champs.
And, hey, they've got number 17, Mississippi State, on the schedule as well, a team a lot of people raised their eyebrows about. When not just that they were ranked, but that they were ranked in the top 20. Just goes to show how much they value the SEC, the committee, at this point in the season. Josh Pate, thank you so much for the time. You can hear and see Josh on the Late Kick podcast each Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. It streams live on the 24/7 Sports YouTube and Facebook page. Want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis. No yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.